All right, there we go. Well, hello, everyone. This is I believe, the third or fourth authors panel that the Global Chamber has hosted. And I'm really excited to talk to our three panelists today who have a wealth of knowledge between them about how to do global business. And I'm excited to see where this conversation goes today. I'm Jacqueline Wales. I'm the author of The Fearless Factor at Work, and the upcoming Fearless Women Leading the Way. And so I'm all about being fearless and asking good questions. So that's what I plan to do today. And we're going to get rolling. It's just after 9 o'clock. And I'd like to say, hold your questions until we're finished with our conversation with the panel, and then we're going to open it up, and you're more than welcome to ask them whatever it is that you think about during the conversations today. So let me introduce our panelists to start with. I'll start with Erika, who is an international business executive with extensive marketing and management and executive coaching experience. She was selected by Stanford University for an extended international assignment in Ghana as a business coach to help advance economic opportunities across West Africa as part of the Stanford Institute for Innovation in Developing Economies. Erika is also the author of Cross-Cultural Management and Organizational Behavior in Africa, and has written a business person's guide to the social and professional cultures in sub-Saharan Africa for multinational oil and gas companies. And I had a chat with her yesterday, and she is a wealth of knowledge on this subject. And for those of you doing business in Africa, listen up, it's good stuff. Next, I'll go to Lothar Soliwon, who is the CEO, I believe, of Worldwide Business Consultants. ZG is the name of the company, and it helps companies adapt to the new world order of business, which includes the accelerated hiring of on-demand talent. They bring in a bunch of management consultants, CIOs, risk strategists, data analysts, software developers, engineers, coaches, etc., to help with all kinds of business in the world, and also assists with mergers and acquisitions to help sell companies using their large global database of potential buyers. Lothar has compiled an extensive list of consultants and others who are, and I seem to have lost my piece. There we go. Hold on a second. My screen blacked out. Lothar, I'm sorry to interrupt on this one, but you have compiled a list of consultants and others who have implemented business practices worldwide, and it is quite a directory as I've looked through it recently. Zach Selch is a global sales mentor, and he is the man who wrote the book on global sales. That is it, number one. International sales has grown 4 organizations tenfold and added 100 million to a company's worth. He also won President Obama's Export Prize and has a great reputation for delivering excellent growth across 130 countries and 6 continents. So if you're doing anything to do with, or you want to do anything with global sales, and many of you do, this is the book to go to when doing business overseas. So I think I have introduced all of you. Let me know if I made a hash of it or if this all made sense. So, so let us begin. I'm going to start with Lothar, and I want to ask you, why did you write this directory, if you like, of consultants? What was it that inspired you to get going on this?
I wrote this basically for the benefit of small to mid-sized businesses that have been thinking if perhaps they need to hire a consultant. Things aren't right in the business. They want help. They don't understand the new economy. They just you know, want to become better. So this is a guide to get started on where do you look for, how do you decide on who you're going to hire on a consultant. Another aspect of this, as you mentioned, is the directory, which is basically has summaries of many people, expertise summaries of many people who do business consulting and coaching in IT, marketing, healthcare, and many other areas. It's kind of a broad spectrum of expertise that various companies might be looking for. I also put in a social media chapter, since there's so many people who don't know much about social media. They may know basics, and this isn't an inclusive guide to social media, but since it's so important to business these days, there's a social media chapter. And at the end of the book, I put in something about our pro bono side venture, which is the Central Illinois Technology Triangle. You know, since I'm the author, I could put it in. If this was edited by a big publisher, they'd throw it away. But since it is of interest to some people, what this basically is I think economic development in Central Illinois, and perhaps in many other parts of the country, can be improved. In Central Illinois, we have economic development corporations that are promoting their own individual communities. They think their community is the best in the world and they're going to become the next Indianapolis. But in reality is they don't have strength in numbers. In strength in numbers, there's well over 1 million people in Central Illinois. This is kind of a branding umbrella and promotional umbrella for the region to make it grow. Everybody's complaining there's no growth in our community. In Illinois, there's a population loss that many people are very concerned about, and not that many new businesses are coming in. But if they band together, they might be able to really do something. And the special thing that Central Illinois has going for it, it's one of the world's greatest hubs when you look at the whole region of ag tech. Agribusiness is very important to the region. If you look at follow the money, you see agriculture is very, very important to the Illinois economy. And not enough people are thinking about agriculture. They think it's just somebody driving a tractor. They don't look at the whole business aspect. It's big money. So
and of course, this applies to the global community too, because agriculture is definitely a global business at this point in time. So definitely. I'm going to jump over to Erika at this point in time, and again, I'm going to ask the same question, Erika. Why did you write your book, and what was important about that?
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to the Global Chamber for having me as well. It's an honor to be here. I wrote the book based on personal experience as an expat, and specifically as an expat to Africa. It was at that time, it was in the mid to late 90s. I was quite young. I was working with the IBM Corporation, which I worked for 10 years. Halfway through my career, I opted and wanted to do something in Africa with the company, and haphazardly was able to make that happen as an expat. And what I experienced during those years overseas, specifically starting with leading the company's operations back into West Africa by way of Ghana. I was promoted to the country manager of Ghana operations, and worked on building and cultivating relationships with local companies on the ground, and would be supported with projects by expats coming from Australia, or from, it could be from Canada, it could be from the UK, to help implement these projects. And these were from IBM operations all around the world to help support our ventures on the ground. What I experienced was sometimes a huge gap in understanding some of the cultural expectations when it comes to building those relationships and bringing multinational teams together. But there would be a huge gap in some of the understanding of local cultural expectations and those coming from overseas. So essentially, over the years, I saw this on a broader scale where many of my colleagues, some of them would terminate, or their terminate their expat assignments because of frustrations, not with their skill sets or skill levels, but specifically when it comes to dealing with cross-cultural issues. And so many of those frustrations made people want to pack their bags up and leave, and it cost the company a lot of money, and it caused frustration all around. So I wanted to write something for the benefit of anybody that is going into this part of the world to really help set you up for success before you hit the ground. And what I focused on was not so much the hard factors that they call when you go overseas, you know, like understanding tariffs, laws and regulations, economic situation, or even currency fluctuations. Those are readily available. They're pretty straightforward. But what we don't set expats up for in understanding is what are the people-to-people dimensions of doing business in this very different environment. And so that is where the motivation started from. And I eventually came back to the US. I went to work at the Thunderbird School of Global Management. And that's what I started writing and publishing in the Thunderbird International Business Review, and eventually on a broader scale. So that's what the motivation was.
That's a terrific analysis here. And it's a great segue for me to talk to Zach, who's all about global sales, which you can't make a sale without having people-to-people connections. So I want to talk to you, Zach, and find out what about, you know, you are the global sales expert. So tell me a little bit about your book.
So yeah, I wrote my book very much like what Erika's saying. You know, you get a lot of people who are involved or tasked with growing international sales. And very frankly, you know, they're quite often just sort of pushed out there and told to do it, and they don't really know what they're doing. There's usually a huge loss in institutional knowledge, because you might find somebody is tasked with being the international sales manager for, you know, and I'm not talking about IBM, I'm talking about your, you know, your $100 million manufacturing company that makes widgets and wants to sell someplace. And what happens is they, you know, they put somebody into the job and he does it for 2 or 3 years, and then he moves on and he doesn't pass that information on to anybody else. And very frankly, in 2 or 3 years, he probably can't really figure out how to do very much anyway. And so a lot of these companies, which are really the backbone of the American economy, and in other countries, they really are a lot more serious about their international business. In America and a lot of places, they're just not, they don't have the skill set to do global sales. And so I wrote the book. The basic idea, it's a 400-page manual. The basic idea is really to help people learn. It's a playbook or a textbook. And now, actually, I found out that a lot of universities are using it in their courses to train in their global trade or their international trade courses, because there really isn't anything like this out there. And I have a lot of friends who went to Thunderbird or who work in different companies who have been through a lot of really top-notch business schools, and they're not really learning how to run international sales. So that's the idea behind the book. The book is really a manual or a guide for international sales managers. And like you said, nothing happens in these companies without sales. And we very often have consultants who will help you with the regulatory issues, and they'll help you open an office, and they'll find you a lawyer or an accountant and stuff like that. And that's great. But if you can't sell, there's no reason for any of this stuff, right? And that's really where a lot of companies get tied up, is they think they're going to be able to sell a lot easier than they really can. And then they get caught up in the weeds of trying to sell. And then they either give up or they say, well, you know, that my product isn't a good fit for those markets, right? And it's typically because they didn't quite know how to do the activities involved in selling.
That's great. That's great. And I think that that is a critical problem and one that needs to be addressed. So I'm going to come back to that in a minute with some questions.
Right.
Lothar, I'll come back to you for a second. And so what do you think is the greatest challenge for coaches and consultants who want to do business globally?
There's cultural problems, language problems. There's really, it's complex, you know. First of all, just finding markets in other countries. You know, how do you brand yourself? How do you market yourself? How do you find potential clients? It's a challenge. I mean, if you're not established, for example, consultants, you know, if you're a big consulting company like McKinsey and Company, Accenture, you have a brand and people will come to you because you have this brand that's behind you. But if you're a smaller company, it's very hard for consultants and coaches to get started internationally.
So
They've
how do you
never heard
break
of
through
you.
that barrier? How do you break through that barrier? I mean, that clearly is an element. I mean, if you're talking about small businesses, and small businesses are the ones who want to get connected, because again, coming back to the people thing, you got to get connected to that. Does your book answer some of those questions for them by giving them the resources necessary?
Well, we have people who can help them with this. You know, we have a lot of business marketing people. You know, we have people who've been in marketing for a long time who can help them, but it costs a lot of money. And then to build a brand globally can be very expensive. You know, and these smaller consultants and coaches know that. It's just hard to get started. It's hard to make waves. You know, these expertise summaries show in our marketing section what people can help them. But if you don't have the money, it costs, you know. Well, for one thing, I just want to give a plug to the Global Chamber. Being a member of the Global Chamber can help somewhat. You know, you become, it's a growth organization. There's more and more people of various businesses around the world that are helping people understand what the opportunities are in other countries and where to go for assistance and advice. It's the only game in town, really. If you're looking for being able to, at a low cost, get connected to people around the world, I would say join the Global Chamber. And that's why I did. You know, I don't know how else to do it if you don't have much money.
Okay, so you're saying it's a money problem. It's
a
not
money
matter
problem. Well, it's an
of
expertise problem
information.
too. You have to
Yeah.
have the right people help you out. If you're just a basic business coach, there's a lot of competition. You're competing against the big companies who are well known. I mean, the big companies do really multi-million-dollar jobs. You know, McKinsey and Company is not going to work with a small company with a $50,000 project to do
Right.
something. They don't want to talk to you. They're not interested. But how
Right.
do you connect? There's a connection problem.
So I'm going to throw this over to Zach, because Zach, you clearly, you can certainly address that with small businesses and global sales. How does one deal with that? Because I'm sure there are people on listening to this call who are interested in, I'm a small company, how do I do this?
Well, the most important thing people have to realize, and I'm sort of looking at it from a different perspective from Lothar. I typically deal with companies that make something, right? Manufacturers, and typically those are, you know, they're what I usually refer to as widgets. You know, it's very sexy nowadays. We deal with you know, people, you go to a conference and you'll hear about Uber or how they succeeded or those type of things. But if you're $100 million company in Illinois that's manufacturing a piece of something that's used in a hospital or used in manufacturing a car or even used in packaging food, that, you know, what Uber did to be successful isn't really relevant to you, right? So how do you succeed? Typically, you're going to work through channel partnerships. And for the most part, I always tell people, if you are a $500 million or less manufacturer, the way you're going, what's really important to you is getting those correct channel partnerships in the right countries with the right level of mind share of the salespeople, because that's going to be what makes you succeed or fail. And so what my, my job is, what I do is I help people with that. And the reason I wrote this book was really to try and teach people to do it themselves, because it really is an art and a science on its own in terms of finding, and it's one of these things that people mess up all the time. People really seem to have almost a skill of finding the wrong distributors in the wrong markets for the wrong reasons. And then that really drives their business into the ground in terms of international sales. Finding the right partners, right channel partners, and getting them working the right way and getting them selling is really what's going to make or break a company's international sales activities. So that's really the key to it, is you need to get boots on the ground selling your product all over the world, or in the relevant markets for your product. And that's really what, these small to medium-sized companies that are trying to expand internationally, that's something they very often don't quite get, and they try and bypass the system. They try and figure out ways to do it otherwise. And usually that's what leads to failure.
So that would drop me down into Erika, and I say drop me down because you're in the lineup of things. You're down there. Anyways, Erika, this is a very interesting thing that Zach's saying, because it also expands into that cultural piece of, trying to do business when you don't understand the culture of either the organization or the country in which you're going into is a huge barrier. So trying to make sales here in America is very different from trying to make sales in Africa. So perhaps you can speak to that and give us some insights on what that looks like.
Yes. You touched on a very important aspect, is that the difference of trying to make sales here in the US versus trying to make sales in, let's say, West Africa, Nigeria versus Ghana or whatnot. In the US, for example, cold calling is a very common thing. I can cold call on somebody, or I can meet somebody on a plane, and then I can start talking about business, and we might be able to even close something or come very near to it because we've just met and there's a common element there. What you find is, very different in African nations. And that's one thing that cuts across, because Africa is not a monolithic entity. It's, you're over 50 different nations with 50 different types of cultures and then subcultures in each country. But one thing that cuts across that very relationship-oriented region is that we need to build a relationship first. And once we build that relationship, and you get to know me and I get to know you, it's quite possible that my product might even be more expensive than my competitor's product. But because we have such a good relationship and we've built trust and we've established that, you would probably prefer to purchase from me, and not just for now, but for the long run. And so that is one aspect that's quite different. To build on what Zach said, that's also quite interesting. He mentioned channels. Well, I was responsible for going into a region and a country and saying, okay, what do you suggest, since you are now boots on the ground, as to how do we establish ourselves in this region? And even though we're a big global brand, as IBM at the time when I was with them, that was not the answer to just rely on the brand recognition. So I helped establish a strategy that we will look at local companies who are already established in the country, and we will look for companies that have product lines that are similar or complementary, and build relationships with local companies. And basically that's what we did, is we built a channels, basically distribution model, where we operated indirectly, but through local companies. So we relied on their expertise and their established place in society to really have that authorization. So we established them as IBM authorized business partners. And we brought in the skill set and the training to train local employees of these companies. And we supported them in supporting local clients. So that partnership aspect is a big part of a curriculum that I teach expats, is basically going through kind of a partnership aspect. It works wonderfully, and it cuts across all industries, from insurance to technology to various, and also there's a huge social aspect of it, because you are creating jobs. You're also, you're training, you're transferring knowledge and transferring skill sets. It's a much more sustainable model, so that you're not just there, but your goal is to empower people locally and companies locally. So that's a great model for really establishing yourselves and integrating into a completely different market.
I think that's a great piece there, because the Global Chamber is all about creating partnerships. And in fact, I think every one of you on this call today would probably say, I could not do business without building partnerships. And if I look at Lothar's book, where you have this great directory of individuals, I presume that that's all about building that collaborative partnership with others in order to get the results that you're looking for. That would make the most sense, correct?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to add to that?
Well, it takes a long time to build partnerships too. I mean, people don't there's a complete lack of trust in business these days. There's so many scams. People think they're going to be cheated somehow, or these people don't know what they're doing. There's a lot of mistrust in consulting, because you hear time and time again, these people hired a consultant, and these consultants knew less than they did. I hear that all the time. These people didn't know what they were doing. Maybe they were experts in one area, but the assignment that they took on, they just really didn't know enough about it.
So how much of the what we've just been going through in the last 18 months, and this is for all three of you because you can speak to this, how much has business changed with the result of COVID and the isolation that we've all had to experience, not being able to get out into the world? How much more difficult is it for people to really do business effectively under the circumstances that we've all been living with for the last 18 months and is not changing anytime soon? So I'll throw that out to the panel, because I think this is an important question for how we're doing business today.
Yeah, so I think what you're going to find is 18 months ago or 2 years ago, we were all very, very dependent on face-to-face meetings and face-to-face business. And we've had to sort of find ways around that, which is very difficult. When you think about selling, there are really two big pieces of the sales process. And one of those is, you could say, around passing information, right? We have to give information to the customers so that they can understand that the product solves their problems. And the other part of that is about building relationships. And passing information, there are lots and lots of tools we've developed in the past 18 months that we've gotten very comfortable with that help us pass that information to people. The relationship building is really difficult remotely. And especially in places like sub-Saharan Africa, very often people who are selling in America will say, but I've figured out how I can make great relationships over Zoom with my client in Cleveland. That's great. Mm-hmm. And that might very well work in a lot of places, and in a lot of places in Western Europe and a lot of places in America. But in a lot of other countries, because of the nature of how people develop trust, if you're not able to do this face-to-face, it really is virtually impossible. And I've seen, I did a fair amount of selling last year remotely, and it was brutal to establish relationships, right? And what typically ended up was we would go through 80 or 90% of the work, and then I would have to figure out a way to get somebody in the room representing me one way or another, right? And in some cases, it was almost comical where, you know, we went through 90% of the process, and as soon as I could get somebody face to face to be there in the room with the client, the deal closed, right? And it just came down to that, which also meant a lot more working with partnerships, a lot more working with almost improvised partnerships. One of the stories I've told this year is I've actually found people on things like Fiverr in places like Bangladesh and West Africa, where I've said to people, I need you to go to this address and hand somebody a cell phone and talk to him and get him to talk to me because he isn't answering his phone, and I need somebody to do this. And I ended up paying people, you know, $50 or $100 just to ride their scooter across town and hand somebody a cell phone, because that was the only way I could get this type of thing rolling, right? And I've worked with a lot of partners this year where basically I said, I'll give you a percentage of the deal to go in and get in the room with this guy and move it forward. And so we have to be a little bit more imaginative. We have to figure out how to handle this stuff. But we can't just say, well, we can't sell. On the other hand, we do have to work within the cultural limitations of the target markets we're working in. And about 3/4 of American exports go to countries that have very high levels of relationship building aspects. They're not the American situational trust model that we're used to here, where you can say, well, I'm the vice president of my company, you should trust me. I like to say, you know, you go into a Best Buy and somebody approaches you in a blue shirt and you hand them your credit card. That's all you need for trust in America is a blue shirt, right? In Nigeria, in Korea, and other countries, you need to develop this trust, and it might take a long time. So the best thing you can do in these cases is find somebody who has that trust built already and get them to work with you.
Yeah, I think this is a big trust issue. And Erika, I know you know a lot about this because, you know, and again, you can speak to how things have been for the last 18 months, because managing organizational behavior from a distance, it's very, very hard. And as we know, most big companies are highly dysfunctional because there is a lack of trust in the workplace. There's fear in the workplace. There's no psychological safety in the workplace. So people are not trusting each other. People are not having the conversations that matter. And that's been made even more evident by what we've been going through for the last 18 months or so. So perhaps you can speak to that one.
Yes, it's been difficult as far as a transition, going from the face-to-face and now to a very a virtual. I've been doing coaching for the last almost 5 years with the Stanford University's SEED program, the Stanford Institute for Innovation in Developing Economies. And so last year, at the height of the pandemic, I had already relocated for another year in Ghana. So I was living in Accra and coaching companies in my area was Ghana, Nigeria. And so the year before that, I was Kenya, Uganda. And it was in the middle of March that we were all suddenly evacuated, brought back to the US. And so it was a jarring experience because we were midway through a well-developed coaching work plan with the companies that I had been working with. And at this point now we were transitioning to, okay, how do we pivot the business to kind of withstand all this uncertainty? And so now that's what became the challenging factor. And you're now having to redefine your relationship with your coachees. And these are companies I've been face-to-face with on the ground. And now we're all looking at each other through a screen, and we're all uncertain about what this future looks like. So, the whole Stanford program was now trying to figure out how do we change the program from an in-person program to a virtual program until further notice that we're all back on the ground. So what we have really focused on and what we've had to do is really help these local companies also pivot their business, because a lot of the businesses, I had companies, for instance, I had one company that's a pharmaceutical retail company with multiple locations in Uganda, and people weren't coming into the retail pharmacies anymore. So, how do we move more to a social media presence? How do we move on to different aspects and do promotions and start a delivery process? And so these are some of the challenges we've had to work on, but that's how I've pivoted and tried to help coach my companies to be able to withstand all the pressures and changes from all these different uncertainties.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that this is a really interesting conundrum for people who are building businesses at this point in time. Innovation is the key. I mean, there's no question that, it's innovate or die at this point in time. And, I see some quotes about, working on different ideas from Zach. And I think that's where all of us are sitting at this point in time, is how do we continue to show up and how do we continue to make a difference with the businesses that we're running under the circumstances that we are currently dealing with. How much of that has changed in terms of the books that you've written and thinking about writing in the future? Give me some thoughts on what you see going forward. Where do you think this conversation needs to go, given the restrictions that we're all currently dealing with? So Lothar, I haven't heard from you in a moment, so let me hear from you on that one.
I am really not planning on writing any new books in the near future. The last few years, I've written 2 books, Business Advisors, Consulting and Coaching. Last year and this year, Looking Beyond the Business. These 2 books, I put a lot of effort in. The first book took me 4 years to write, off and on, so I used to be an encyclopedia writer, which is completely different. And, writing, it takes a lot of time. I'm just not a natural born writer. I mean, my books are written to be informative, basic, informational. I'm not F. Scott Fitzgerald. I like him, but I've never wanted to be a novel writer. But I don't have a topic right now I'd like to write another book on. Perhaps next year or in 3 years, I'll find something. One reason being is it's hard to sell books. My next door neighbor is a retired psychiatrist, and he doesn't practice anymore. And he just decided he's going to devote his life to writing, and which he has done. He's a very smart guy. He's written some very interesting stuff, and I've read it. And a challenge to being a writer is selling these books. If you really want to make some real money off books, you may not make real money. He's tried time and time again. He's had several books, and not one of them has really made real money. So if you want to write something, it's hard to get something out there because there's so much out there. There's so many ebooks. You just look at a topic, and it's all over the place. How many books there are on a certain topic? Zach has been fortunate, with his book. He's got it in universities and they're using it. One of my books is being used in Peru on an ebook, but it's not. It was just a voluntary thing. I said, here, use it. It's free. You know what I mean? Then they're using it for that reason. But
that's great.
But and I know other writers, and hardly anybody is making any money. Sometimes the stars align and you got the right topic, it's the right thing. You've got a lot of great reviews on Amazon or something, or some local newspapers or whatever, or radio shows pick up in your book, it does well, but it's.
So here's the secret. There's no money to be made on books. Books are not where you make the money.
Right.
Books are simply a credential that gets you to where you want to go. That's it.
Right.
That's
And
what
that's,
books are.
yeah, I totally agree with you. And I'm not disappointed. I wrote these books because there were a lot of references to ZG Worldwide Consultants in these books. And I put information about them in. I mean, it's not all about ZG Worldwide, but my name's on it. My company and me and I are kind of go together.
You're all tied to the hip, as they say. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I want to jump over to Zach because I know you've got some more ideas percolating up there. And
I was going to say, in answer to your question, my book is full of basically saying you have to do this face to face. And when my copy editor was looking at it, she goes, this is a problem because I published it about a year ago now. And she was like, this is a problem. This might change everything. And so, there is a lot of room now. I'm actually working on an updated version which deals with virtual selling and how virtual selling interacts with global sales. And my first book was a travel book for business people called What to Do with a Layover in 106 Cities. And now nobody's traveling, right? So I thought, here I am, I'm going to tell people, if you have an evening off in Abuja, what do you do? If you have an evening off in Kazakhstan, in Almaty, what do you do? And now nobody's traveling, so nobody wants that kind of stuff. But I'm sure they'll come back to it. But yeah, what I'm working on now is trying to fit in the virtual selling element and make that part of what people can do with it.
great. And Erika, what's your thinking on this going forward? Because clearly you are a face-to-face person, and how are we doing that? So, and your book is definitely about that, and a great deal of that and more, of course, but it is a piece for us to think about. So tell me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm actually working on a book right now that is more focused on leadership, and leadership specifically in uncertain environments. I think it's relevant to the region of the world I've worked in most, which is Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, which has been uncertain prior to the pandemic. And there's been a lot of challenges in how do you operate in such uncertain, sometimes very volatile. You've heard about the VUCA world and leading through the VUCA world, which is the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And it's just the pandemic has only underscored that need for understanding what are the skill sets that leaders need to be able to adapt and in this kind of environment. So I really want to help guide, mentor future leaders in understanding this and being able to integrate some of these skills into the workplace and also into daily life. So that's what I'm working on right now, is working on a book on that kind of leadership, and really would love to use both the book and my personal experience to help kind of guide and mentor the next generation. So that's what I'm working on right now.
That's great. This has been a really rich conversation. I've really enjoyed getting to know what you're up to and what your thinking is around this. And because we have limited time, I want to be able to open up to questions. So we have a few minutes left, and I'm going back through the chat here to see what we got going on here. great agreement about the global chamber. Lothar, you kind of nailed it, how important that is. Erika, great relationship versus cold call approach from Gloria. And that trust is definitely an issue, even more so today. Her question is, how do we get people to focus on trust and loyalty when doing business, when they are working against others who don't? Does that make sense? Yeah.
It's Darwinism. You can't sell. I always say to people, if you are in the international sales business and people realize they can't trust you, you are not going to last, right? It's like, as crazy as this sounds, it's a small world out there. People who are in business talk to each other, they know each other. And if you get a reputation of somebody who can't be trusted, you're simply not going to last in this world. And I've seen this very often with people who have this idea that, they think, okay, I picked up this product, it's not good enough to sell in the American market, I'm going to go sell it in sub-Saharan Africa, and I'll do pretty well there because I'll sell it for cheap. And they sell a couple of units and they don't do what they're supposed to do, and people talk and it stops, right? You can't do this long term. You can cheat people for a little while, but you can't do it long term. That's my feeling. I've seen this over and over again. I don't know anybody who's been successful for a 20-year career who has screwed over distributors or screwed over customers. Typically people talk. You have to, more business morality is a matter of survival, right? You literally will do better if people will trust you than you will if people don't trust you.
So it speaks to the issue of integrity, basically. You do business with integrity. And if you're doing business with integrity, you gain trust, you build trust, and so on and so forth. That makes total sense. Another question I have is from Doug. How do you see the perception of trade around the world? Better or worse? More or less open? More or less opportunities? So what are we seeing here? I'm going to throw that over to Erika. Do you have any insights on that one?
I think, in spite of so much that's happened globally in the last few years, I still am quite optimistic about global trade. In Africa, there's the free trade agreement, the Continental Free Trade Agreement, that is monumental for the continent. And it has now opened the doors and the awareness, and has put structure around trade, inter-Africa trade, and is now the world's largest trading zone. And I think that once that has, it gains traction, I think that's going to be huge for the continent, because the continent has, individual nations have traded more with the US and with Europe than they have with their next door neighbor. And there's now this realization. I think the realization has been there, but it's a matter of, with the world's second largest continent, how do we formalize this? How do we create structure around it? And so now that's happened. It's, so I think that's going to be huge, is when countries start trading with each other and they're able to add more value on the continent to local produced products, and what will that do for international trade when it comes to sending those products outside of Africa, and vice versa. So I think there is optimism when it comes to global trade, and I think that it will benefit and hopefully be well managed from an African standpoint of view.
And I see Zach nodding his head vigorously up there.
I'm bursting here because it's amazing, Erika. This was you said this is a big thing for Africa. This is a big thing for the world. This is a giant market, unified market now, with the most fast growing economies in the world brought together. Now they might today be smaller economies. So people are looking at it and they're saying, I'd still rather sell in Germany, but that's short-sighted, right? This market in Africa with fast growing economies, with newly middle-class people, with young populations, all these things indicate that sub-Saharan Africa is a fantastic market to go into. And, you know, if 1% of American companies are successfully exporting, maybe 1 in 1,000, 1 in 5,000 are successfully exporting to sub-Saharan Africa. And it's, you know, and people don't even think about it.
Yeah.
Lothar, you got anything to add to this?
Well, I totally agree with both Zach and Erika. International trade is going to grow and grow and grow because so many countries produce things, export things that are needed by other countries. For example, the United States has so many agricultural products that so many countries need. They need this stuff. So, and it's priced at reasonable prices. So many people will buy this. And another thing is South America has been looking at a unified trade zone for years and years and years. I mean, there's people been very interested in this. Maybe it'll happen sometime. If they see what's happened in Africa, South America may do the same sort of thing. So, and you know, unless the government is restrictive, and there's some governments that don't want to do trade with other countries. There's lots of sanctions and things like that. That's some hindrance, but it's not a major problem right now. People are just going to export because that's just the way the trends are.
Yeah. So another question from Doug. What feedback have you received from your books and how does that impact you?
Well, I'll go in that sense. I think when I started writing, it appeared, you know, to be very niche. And when I first published, which I was at Thunderbird at that time, and writing was not part of my job responsibilities. I was a director of corporate relations, but having been at the school that was ranked #1 for international business education, there were tracks at the time for every part of the world for graduate students, except for Africa. And what we found was that, you know, this is the world's #1 school in international business education. There's no track for Africa. So I wanted to share my personal experience as a global manager, having worked on the continent, and that's when I volunteered to start writing and speaking in classes. So the response that I got was corporations saying, hey, we would like to do the same thing. We've read your piece on what you did with IBM. We're a multinational, we'd like to do the same thing. And that led to me writing a curriculum for corporate executives who wanted to kind of train their executives to have that same kind of success on the continent. So that's the response that I ended up leaving and turning that training into a business and doing cross-cultural training for several years. So it's been positive in that sense. And I was quite surprised because you think it's such a niche part. And at the time, nobody was interested, you know, well, people were beginning, there was the Africa Rising story that was coming up in the 2010s. But that was the response that surprised me. And it was something I did out of passion and interest. And it's continued to flourish from there.
I think that totally makes sense. You know, when Lothar was talking earlier about, you know, books and not making money on books, it's like, what is books, where are your books leading you? And I found that certainly in my case too, you know, your books lead you somewhere else. Zach, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I get probably a message almost every day from somebody saying something about how it helped them, you know, and here's the deal. I'm a sales manager, right? I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a literary figure. I like to help people make money, right? And I had this one guy send me a scan of a purchase order for $70K. And he said, he's this international sales manager for a small company in India. And he said it was the single biggest purchase order his company has ever gotten. And he goes, and it's just because of what I learned from your book, right? And that kind of thing, for me, that's fantastic, right? And I get messages like that constantly from people. I find that I've actually sold a lot of copies of my book in Africa and India to sales managers of really small companies that are like in charge of international sales. And I've had people, that type of thing just makes my day, I'll tell you. But it also drives my business. All the clients I work with now are people who read my book before they reached out to me. So that's what my book is doing.
Terrific. Lothar, what's the feedback on your book?
The people actually bought it and read it. They like it. They said it's a good basic book to learn more about what consultants do, what coaches do. I mean, it's basic information, and which is good. But I haven't gotten any volume of response. The book was translated into Spanish. Asesor. This is the previous book. Asesor de negocios, consultores y coaches. Christian Aguirre and Donahi Montes, who are native Spanish speakers, translated this. And I was fortunate that they did this because, it gave me another market in South America and Central America and Mexico. And there's been some response for sales in Mexico. So, but like I said, I am not getting a big response because I'm more or less invisible. I'm an unknown author in an obscure subject matter. So I wish I had more, but I got some response and some positive feedback, and nobody said how terrible it was.
So Gloria said, you're all true entrepreneurs because you use your writing to fill in the missing gaps as you see and experience them. And I think that's really the key to writing good books is writing through experience, because it really gets you into the nitty-gritty of things. We have a couple of minutes left, so very briefly from each one of you, what should people be taking away from this conversation today? So Zach, what would you like to tell people that they should be thinking about?
The one thing I'm going to say is, and we sort of touched on this when we were talking the other day, sell with intent. Look at global expansion and global sales as something that you have to learn and you have to understand and you have to do with intent, because it's probably, I would say, the single weakest part of any company in terms of how seriously they take it. You wouldn't, choose your brother-in-law to be head of manufacturing because you like him. But I can tell you across America, people are put into this job for the wrong reasons, and nobody gives them any training or support or coaching or mentoring and figures they'll just figure it out. So that's the big thing I would say. Terrific.
Erika, what's your one big piece of advice for today?
Yeah, I would like to just expand on what Zach said. You don't wing it. When it comes to international business, take it very seriously in the sense of, I'll just figure it out. If you go in with that attitude, largely you will be disappointed, and it could set you back. My philosophy is when doing business on a global stage, remember that business culture is an extension of local culture. And if you keep that in mind, that your business culture is going to be an extension of local culture, means that you really need to pay attention to what the local culture and the values are, and just to better understand the business culture. I've worked in an international company, and going from the US to an African setting, it's the same company, but can be operated and people can be motivated by completely different sets of values and motivations. So if you keep that in mind, I think it's critically important.
Terrific. And Lothar, your final thoughts on this as we reach the top of the hour?
I think that many companies shouldn't start exporting until they really have their ducks in order. It's complex, it's difficult, and there may be a great need for specialized people to help them along. They could lose their shirt if they try it. But I am saying there's great opportunities out there, but you have to really think it through and be prepared. So I'll leave it at
That's
that.
great. So in my last message here, I want to tell you about next week's, in fact, I'll just do that and then I want to close with all of you. Next week, we're having a conversation on fictional storytelling, which is an approach to teaching doing business globally. And it's definitely going to be a different approach to the technical side of things, where storytelling is an important part of marketing, as you probably all know. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that conversation goes. We are just past the hour. I want to say thank you to all three of you for spending time with us this morning and giving us your really great insights. And Gloria's giving the 2 thumbs up here. So I presume we did okay, didn't we?
You were great. You were great, Jackie.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's been my pleasure. It's really a great pleasure to meet all of you. So I think we're done. Are we done? I think we are. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Stay in touch.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.